Genesis 6:4, it's critical that people understand that the giants we're talking about were both before the flood and after the flood. And Genesis 6:4 says this: there were giants in the earth in those days and also after that. Now, after that means after the flood. When the sons of God came into the daughters of men and they bare children to them, the same became the mighty men which were of old, men of renown. The fascinating thing about my quest for the giants has always been that unless you understand the root of a problem, you can never deal with the fruit of the problem. It's just like sin. So now we're at the point where we're going to talk about why it's important to understand the difference between pre-flood architecture and the big giants, the big guys meaning the 36-footers and above, and then the giants even that were in King Og's day, whether they were up to 18 feet. But a lot of things changed after the flood. So, Tim, let's go ahead and take it. I'll just turn it over to you, and you just take it for as long as you want to lay it out so people understand what the find was, why it is so important. And no one ever has dealt with this, although the copycats will now come up with it. But the point being is explain the, if you will, the juxtaposition that you found at the different sites that you went to between the pre-flood architecture and the post-flood architecture. Go ahead and take it as long as you want it.
Well, let me say first that your reference to the giants being bigger before the flood and then smaller after the flood is actually something that the Inca believed, which I found that to be astounding. The Inca believed, and it's recorded a few times, it's mentioned a few times by some of these chroniclers, that the giants after the flood were smaller than 15 foot, basically, is what they were saying when you do the math on it. But that the giants before the flood were much larger. Those are the big, when they found the big bones, when they would talk to the Spanish about giants, it was in the context of pre-flood giants and then also post-flood giants, some of whom were still alive. Now, let me say that again. Some of those giants were still alive, and the Inca referenced them. And one very salient example is from, I think I've got so many documents on my screen here, it's confusing. It's from one of these guys and one of these chroniclers who talks about that during his time while he was in Lima, there was a young man, a mestizo, which is a half-breed between the Spanish and the Indians. During that time, this young man came to Lima. He was almost 9 feet tall. Almost 9 feet tall. That's not gigantism. That is something very interesting going on. He was 18 years old, and he was referenced as a giant. And in connection to the stories of the giants that the Inca told, in other words, they were using him as proof that what the Inca were saying was true. And it wasn't just the Inca; it was the different tribes all throughout Peru and certainly all throughout South America. And again, they worshipped the giants. This was seen as something that was admirable, something that was desirable, was to be from the giants, was to be from this lineage of giants. I can't believe how much information there actually exists from the natives themselves in Peru concerning giants. In fact, the Inca, there's a very famous Inca chronicler, and I say Inca chronicler because he was Inca by blood, but he was also what's the word, Spaniardized or he became a European Inca basically, and his name was Juan de Santa Cruz was his Christian name, and then he has this long Inca name which I'm not going to attempt to pronounce. But he, in his chronicles, he wrote some chronicles called Ancient Accounts from the Kingdom of Peru. It was written in 1613, and he mentions battles that had giants in them. And he mentions in one, and in the and I'm reading from the document, and in the aforementioned battle, they say that 2 giants were killed. Those bones are presently in Chacaro, set upon pedestals. So, in other words, the giants fought each other or were fighting on the same side. They died, and they enshrined their bones, which seems to be a common situation with the natives when dealing with giants. So we're talking about the Inca referencing pre-flood giants, referencing post-flood giants, some of which were still alive. So when we were in Tiwanaku, obviously we were, again, always looking for evidence of giants everywhere we go. But I didn't even realize when I was actually there in Bolivia, because I hadn't reviewed these documents yet, because we were just, everything was fast and furious when we were in Peru, that Tiwanaku itself, and for those who don't know where Tiwanaku is, it's right across the Peruvian-Bolivian border in Bolivia. It's about a 45-minute drive from the Peruvian border. It's in northern Bolivia in the Altiplano, and it is one of the most incredible megalithic, I would say one of the most enigmatic megalithic sites, archaeological sites on the planet. And there's a lot of confusion surrounding Tiwanaku because it's known by different names. The indigenous name is Tiwanaku. The Spanish name is Tiahuanaco. They are referring to the same place. Within Tiwanaku is Pumapunku. So I had no idea while I was there. I suspected it, of course, but I didn't know that giant bones, not just giant bones, I shouldn't say just giant bones because people think mastodon dinosaur, giant skeletons, entire skeletons with the head still connected of human beings, of giants, were dug up right there in Tiwanaku. And this is confirmed by some of these guys who were there, who were in Tiwanaku, who lived there for a while, who studied the ruins in the 16th century. This isn't hearsay. This is right from these guys who knew what was there, knew what had been dug up, and it was common knowledge that giants were found there, and also the elongated skull people of normal stature. So isn't that interesting? Here again we have giants and we have these elongated skull people. I don't know if the giants themselves had elongated skulls. I can't remember if they referenced that specifically to Tiwanaku, but it's amazing to me that all these programs out there that have done documentaries and television shows on Tiwanaku, none of them have ever mentioned the fact that giants were dug up there. I mean, that would, because that doesn't really fit into their ancient alien narrative. Giants are caused, maybe like an 8-foot giant or a 9-foot giant. They'll say that those could have been the Nordics from the Pleiades star system. But what do you do with a 20-foot giant? What do you do with a 30-foot giant? You're dealing with something very from the whole alien scenario, which I think is tied in, but not in the way they think. You're dealing with something very distinct. You're dealing with these incredibly huge humanoid entities, and they were found buried beneath the soil at Tiwanaku. And not only were giants discovered, the corpses. In some cases, it seems like the documents are referencing corpses as opposed to skeletons. In other words, mummified corpses, and they were very clearly humanoid with heads and connected to their shoulders. I'm not talking about mastodons. And also, the Inca, as well as the Spanish chroniclers, mainly the Jesuits and the different some of the other guys in the different orders, the other Roman Catholic orders. It was common knowledge to them, and I was surprised to find this too. It was common knowledge to the Inca, for example, that the Pumapunku ruins and much of what used to be at Tiahuanaco, and I say used to be at Tiahuanaco because much of what you see at Tiahuanaco today is a fabrication, literally in every sense of the word, a fabrication. The government... it's been long since plundered. The megalithic blocks, the Bolivian government used to use the ruins at Tiahuanaco as a target range. and so they blew it to pieces, basically, a lot of it. And again, you hardly ever hear anybody talk about this kind of stuff. And a lot of the megalithic blocks, not the big ones, the smaller ones, have been carried away over the centuries and have been long since incorporated into walls and roads by the villagers in the surrounding area. So what the government did was they reconstructed, and I say fabricated, because they didn't even base their reconstruction really on archaeological evidence. They just reconstructed this thing, some of the stuff that's standing there, not the Pumapunku stuff. They didn't even try to reconstruct Pumapunku. When you watch our documentary, you'll see why. Very different. They reconstructed some of the other stuff based on guesswork, basically, and nobody factors in. Nobody factors in. I shouldn't say nobody. Obviously, we do, and some other researchers have, like Panansky, the famous Arthur Panansky, who was doing research there in the early 19th century. I should say the early 20th century. He knew that giant bones had been discovered there, and he himself had discovered elongated skulls right there. So there's all this history that has been deliberately, as I said earlier, erased. You can talk about Tiwanaku, you can talk about, for example, the Temple of Kalasasaya, the pyramids there, but you can't talk about it in its real context. What is its real context? Pre-flood, giants, elongated skulls. That's the real context, not aliens or some weird concocted thing that there's really no evidence for. But what there is evidence for, again, giants, elongated skulls, pre-flood, nobody talks about. And it's astounding that people ignore what's right in front of their faces, and they either buy into the BS that the nationalistic regime forces on people there, that being the regime of Evo Morales, or they buy into the ancient alien stuff, neither of which have any evidence to prove their claims, or very scant evidence, when right in front of your eyes is all kinds of evidence. The whole Pumapunku, the whole Tiwanaku area, the whole valley, the whole Altiplano, in fact, was flooded. And that's a fact, because they found seashells and they found the residues of tropical plants. The whole Altiplano was most likely at one time at sea level, and through some kind of cataclysm, probably the flood of Noah, most likely the flood of Noah, was elevated, was lifted up. The entire the surface area of the Altiplano was lifted up together like one block of land to the altitude that it's presently at, which is over 13,000 feet. And because it's over 13,000 feet, there's no way that it could have supported the massive civilization that obviously existed there at one time. So we've got seashells, we've got elongated skulls, we've got bones of giants, we've got technology at Pumapunku, the likes of which no archaeologist could ever even begin to explain how they were able to do the things that they did. And there's all these internet sites out there that are debunking ancient aliens, and in many respects, rightfully so, but also trying to debunk this notion that you needed advanced technology to build, for example, Pumapunku. You know what? You needed advanced technology to build Pumapunku. There's no question about it. When you stand there, when you touch those blocks, again, you'll see this in the documentary, when you feel the vitrified surfaces of these stones, and you look at the angles, and then you take into account the fact that they were submerged for who knows how long, probably centuries underwater. And again, that is a proven fact. The only thing that's disputed is whether it was a local flood of Lake Titicaca or if it was a larger flood. Well, we know it was the larger flood. It was the flood of Noah. In fact, they have recently ruins that are very similar very similar to the ruins that you find at Tiwanaku, in other words, at Pumapunku, at the bottom of Lake Titicaca. So obviously, Lake Titicaca wasn't always there. So it wasn't Lake Titicaca that overflowed. Lake Titicaca is the residue of the ocean. It's the residue, what was left over when that whole area was flooded in the Great Flood of Noah. And again, that was the pre-flood world. That's what is called the antediluvian. Antediluvian, by the way, literally means before the flood. This is a word that is in our vernacular. It is a scientific phrase, and it means exactly what so many of these quote-unquote scientists, anthropologists, historians, archaeologists try to deny, the fact that there was a worldwide flood. And it's actually quite ridiculous that anybody would ever try to deny that fact, seeing as seashells and tropical plants are found on top of Mount Everest, the residues, the petrified remains, not only the altiplano, but on top of all the high mountain ranges on this planet. The entire Earth was obviously submerged in flood. That's a given. And what's also a given is that there were massive giants. There were different races that were not fully human. That is all proven. It really is proven. It's proven far more to such a greater, to such a tremendously greater extent than the theory of evolution, for example. I mean, compared to the theory of evolution, the proof of giants, the proof of a pre-flood world, the proof of advanced technology in the ancient world, I mean, it just far surpasses it. It's not even comparable. The scant evidence that there is for evolution that's being taught as a solid fact and shoved down everybody's throats, and yet here they're absolutely ignoring this incredible reality of a pre-flood advanced world. And of course, we're talking about the world that God himself destroyed. He decimated it. And by the way, a lot of people forget that in the book of Enoch, I call this an angelic hazmat operation. There is what appears to have been an angelic hazmat operation that took place after the flood or during the flood, where the angels were told to basically eradicate the knowledge of the fallen angels, of the watchers, destroy the evidence, get rid of it, bury it. And why? So that we would not know of that time? No, of course not. Noah and his sons were very much aware of the world that they just escaped. And believe me, they told everybody about it. The stories were passed down. It was supposed to be passed down. It was exemplified as something that the human race was not to do again, because obviously it angered God. But it was this hazmat operation in the book of Enoch was done so that the knowledge, the forbidden knowledge, would not be recovered. That's what that was about. Bury the knowledge, because it corrupted the human race. And as I was saying earlier, we are literally unearthing the knowledge of the watchers. We are unearthing the forbidden knowledge of the fallen angels that corrupted the earth. And we're doing it at an incredible pace. And that is, as Steve has said many, many times, that is the prime objective of the secret societies and of many of the agencies working in the governments of the world, including the United States, is to recover the knowledge, to recover the technology of the empire of the gods. And again, when I say the empire of the gods, I'm talking about what the whole ancient world refers to as the time of the gods, when the gods came down, mated with human women, and their offspring, their giant hybrid offspring, were the potentates, the rulers of the earth. And in truth, again, they refer to that as the Golden Age. We know that as an age of incredible darkness, the days of Noah, more specifically, the days of Enoch. And so this is obviously this is what we are documenting in our documentary film, Technology of the Tiwanaku, and they barely show you any of the ruins. And they barely talk about the true history of the place or mention what the Inca believed or what the conquistadors believed or what the Jesuit priests who first came upon those ruins believed. And the Jesuit priests who came upon those ruins, and not just the Jesuit priests, the explorers, the chroniclers, every one of them that I have read so far that came upon the ruins of Tiwanaku says the same thing or infer the same thing, and that is this. This was built before the flood of Noah. They say it in concert with the Inca, in concert with the natives that lived around the area. This was built, and many of them say, by a race of giants before the flood of Noah. That is the true history. That's what our kids should be learning in school. That is the fact. That's what everybody knew. That was the common knowledge, the common narrative that everybody knew. They knew this. They knew the names of the pre-flood entities. They knew the histories before the Tower of Babel, when they were all dispersed and their languages were changed and all the names got scrambled and all the dates and the events got scrambled simply because the languages were scrambled. God confused the languages. They all moved away from each other, created their own cultures, formed their own myths from what they could remember, the fragments that they could remember from the pre-flood world. That's what the myths are built around. But you can be assured that before the Tower of Babel, there was a universal knowledge, not just a knowledge, but like I said before, the pre-flood world was an object lesson. Don't do this again. And folks, we're doing it again. As in the days of Noah, we are doing it again right now, exactly what the flood and the pre-flood world are supposed to exemplify and are supposed to represent as a warning.